Hi there. Today on Lydia's Books, I want to talk about my 6 favorite Richard Laymon books with a bonus book. We're going to talk about Richard Laymon in general. The impetus for this video is that I have identified my favorite Richard Laymon books to myself and on this channel a couple times. It's really based on my past favorites because I acquired quite a lot of Richard Laymon over the past couple years in an effort to reread and revisit a lot of Laymon. Now, I've been rereading a lot of my favorites. I toyed with the idea of going chronologically, but I really wanted to get to rereading some of the things I loved. And it turns out a lot of them are the same so far. Cuts was always a favorite. I've had a chance to read a gorgeous copy of it, which we'll talk about today, spoiler alert. And that opinion hasn't changed. I've reread Beware, which was a favorite of mine. Not so much anymore. It's not a very strong book in my estimation. I didn't enjoy it, and I thought I had. I haven't reread Body Rides yet, but that wasn't in my top 5, let alone the top 6 with a bonus book. But yes, 6 Richard Laymon books that I want to talk about today. Starting with The Woods Are Dark. So I want to see if this changes. So I'm going to do this top 6, which I've never really picked like my top Richard Laymon books. So we'll talk about my top 6. This is really based on the few that I've reread since, like Island will always be on the list. Another spoiler alert, unless I read some Richard Laymon that I've never read before in the next year or two that will bump these around, or rereading, like Beware, some books that maybe aren't up to snuff anymore. We'll find out. The reason this is a top 6 plus a bonus book is that I own 6 of the books I'm going to talk about. That's my top 6 that I own. And there's one in there that I hold in very high regard that I don't have a copy of anymore. We're going to start the list with The Woods Are Dark. This is one of the first Laymons that I read alongside Tread Softly, which we'll talk about later. But yeah, this book in particular still blows it out of the water. You could say The Beast House, The Cellar is classic Laymon. It's not on the list because I have reread it. I do like it. It's just not top 5 or 6. It's up there, trust me. I do like The Beast House. I actually like Friday Night in the Beast House quite a lot too, as sort of a full circle feeling to that whole quadrilogy, if you count that book, or trilogy if you don't. But The Woods Are Dark is so brutal. It's a short book, so it really gets you in and gets you out. Now, a lot of this conversation today will be peppered in with a little bit of Richard Laymon himself. We have a whole lot of Dick here. We have some snippets from A Writer's Tale by Richard Laymon. That's a real holy grail as far as a Laymon collector is. I don't have a copy myself, but it is on the Internet Archive for now. I hope to replace that, if not with a collector's copy that will cost me a paycheck to buy, or if it ever does happen that Kelly Laymon, his daughter, puts out a copy with Deadline Press. It came out in 1999 via Deadline Press in 500 numbered editions and 26 lettered editions, and it's been rumored to be in reprint eventually. I just, fingers crossed, hope that this happens because it's very important from a horror writer's perspective, because there is a lot of writing tips. It is a writing guide book after all, technically, but it is autobiographical input from Richard Laymon himself, and it's supposed to be updated if and when it ever does get re-released with some new content, which we will touch on some of the gaps because it came out in 1999. He died not long after, and there's some posthumous releases we don't have a heck of a lot of autobiographical information about. There's one thing that's a recurring theme in The Woods Are Dark, or also this book if you're following along at home. He spent a lot of time outdoors, and this is one of the ones that really made me feel like he was writing for someone of my demographic. I spent a lot of time camping and in the forest and near the forest. Growing up in a small town in Canada, you usually have forests adjacent, and we had a lot of crown land behind us, a lot of crown land to the right, crown land that we vacationed in, and crown land that we spent time camping, fishing, hiking, all those sorts of things. So there's a lot of hiking going on in The Woods Are Dark. That's what it starts out with, 2 families sort of crossing paths with some wrong turn type people. And I just absolutely love this book for that storyline. Richard Laymon says, And this isn't specifically related to the woods are dark. This is the woods in general, and this is why they show up a lot in his writing. My whole family was active in scouting. We often went camping in the woods. Nearly every summer we drove to Wisconsin, where we stayed in a cabin, went boating, fishing, and swimming. I have great memories of those times, and much of my fiction takes place in areas similar to the places where we had such summer adventures. He spent time, I believe, as a ranger or a scout at least, a lot of time in the forests. As much time in the forest as he spent time as a student. So we'll see how that plays into his writing too. But with The Woods Are Dark, in A Writer's Tale, he says, one Canadian book dealer recommends The Woods Are Dark and offers a money-back guarantee for any reader who is disappointed in it. So that is very high praise. I'd love to know what Canadian bookseller it was that held The Woods Are Dark in such high praise. So this would probably be an author's re-release, the headline author's preferred edition of some sort, or a later reprint like this leisure version that I'm holding in my hand. Apparently, an editor, he says, hadn't appreciated my terse style, so he or she had fixed it for me. They fixed it all right. Sentences strung together by this imbecile no longer made sense. Entire paragraphs were removed. Time sequences were distorted. Changes in punctuation created grammatical errors. In several places, the pronoun she was replaced with the character's name. The wrong character's name at that. The same once-thrown knife got picked up twice. A fight got moved by accident to a different and impossible location. Oh, I couldn't imagine this. I can't begin to describe how badly the novel had been decimated. I was so overwhelmed and frustrated that at one point I actually broke down in tears. Yes, of course he did. If anyone is out there thinking Richard Laymon was a monster, he absolutely was a softie, and that statement makes me feel for the man. Yeah, if you read The Woods Are Dark way back in the day, the older edition put out by Warner Books, and you decided that he couldn't write his way out of a wet paper bag, I think he was edited into that wet paper bag. It was wretched. He provided edits, only half of which were ever applied, so it was just released as a trash fire. So when people were to ask him, why are you so much bigger in the UK and Germany and elsewhere and not in your home country? Warner Books is the reason for releasing a trash fire version of The Woods Are Dark. And he says succinctly, my career in the US never recovered from the damage done by the Warner edition of The Woods Are Dark. I'd have to say it's like one of the number ones. We're going in chronological order here, so I'd have to say this is like my second or third in my favorites. This might change a little bit as we go on. Next, we have another second or third favorite book tied with Woods Are Dark as one of the earlier Richard Laymon novels that I ever read. I don't have a copy here. I really would like to read the back jacket copy, but we'll talk about why I'm not going to in a minute. I really want a version of this book. Out Are the Lights captured my imagination, and after reading quite a few of his woodsy things, I don't think I'd read Island or some of the thicker books by then. I was concentrating on things like Beware, Cuts was kind of short, The Woods Are Dark, shorter books, right? And then I stumbled upon Out Are the Lights. This particular book caught my imagination because I was a moviegoer. I liked movies. I like watching films. The movie 8mm might have come out around that time. Snuff films were like, you know, that taboo thing that people talked about when they talked about horror films, and Faces of Death or Traces of Death had been popularized around that time. So things like snuff films were in the back of the mind. Do they really exist kind of thing. So reading a book by this author that was new to me and one of my heroes, a fast hero already, about a deaf woman that goes to see a film and she can tell from lip reading that the things that are being said or subtitled aren't what's being said, and this person is in danger and is likely dead, and they're probably all watching a snuff film, and I can just imagine. And he put you in that spot very well with his writing, to look around and realize nobody else understands what you understand. And it just terrifying idea. Trying to develop Out Are the Lights, Richard Laymon says, I had nothing more than a book about a movie theater showing snuff films until I realized the potential of making my main character deaf. Moby Dick was probably a pretty ho-hum idea for a book until Melville decided to take away one of Ahab's legs. My suggestion to get past writer's block, ask yourself how the story might go if you made it happen to someone else. Play with the ages of your characters, their genders, their careers, special interests, etc. You may stumble onto a notion that you suddenly bring your story to life, and that will blast away your writer's block. For those that say that he is just very cookie cutter and all of his, women breast boobily down the stairs in tight sweaters and they're all college students and things like that, all his men are kind of hunky and horny, or like awkward teens that are equally horny, they're not really. He does have a really varied cast in a lot of his books. You just have to read a lot of them and pass some of the popular picks, like maybe these are, to get at them. And there's two reasons I'm not going to read the back of Out Are the Lights. I don't have a copy. I wish that hell I did. And this is also a case of Warner Books fucking him over again. This was very early in his career, 1982. He had written some romances and ghostwritten some things, and he was dabbling in other genres, but this was when he had money rolling in from small success already. But Warner Books, on the back cover, he says, readers are provided with a rare opportunity to find out every major plot trick in the book. Out of the Lights is built around a couple of major gimmicks, which are supposed to remain secret until they're discovered by the reader. Like any good book, and he's really good at that sort of thing usually. Anyone who reads the back cover, however, learns every secret, including the final one, which is revealed about 6 pages from the end of the book. This was a case of being stabbed in the back cover. I love that line. A case of being stabbed in the back cover. It would be rather as if the producers of The Usual Suspects had revealed the identity of Kaiser Soze in the posters and previews of the film. How could a publisher be so stupid? I think it's really that attitude that I love so much that comes through when reading a writer's tale. Highly recommend if you can ever find a copy of it. I really hope that it is republished soon. Another one of my darling favorites, Dark Mountain, although I did not know that it was my darling favorite until recently. This was sitting on my shelf languishing. I have not reread it because I was like, I don't remember Dark Mountain. I never read Dark Mountain. It will be near the end of my reading journey here because I want to read Tread Softly. I didn't know, that Tread Softly was rebranded as Dark Mountain for whatever reason. I'm very happy to know that I have a copy of Tread Softly basically on my shelf. It's going to be very different, I'm sure. I love the artwork, though, for Tread Softly. So I still want a copy of Tread Softly for the artwork. If I could have a book poster framed and printed, I think Tread Softly would be one of the covers I would love, huge, emblazoned on my walls. For two families, it was supposed to be a relaxing camping trip in the California mountains. They thought it would be fun to get away from everything for a while, but they're not alone. The woods are also home to two terrifying residents who don't take kindly to strangers. An old hag with unholy powers and her hulking son, a half-wild brute with uncontrollable violent urges. The campers still need to get away, but now their lives depend on it. I love that little twist of phrase. I also love the little tiny poetry that he has going on in here. Beware in your journey, tread softly with care, because of the hag in her dark mountain lair. Speak only in whispers, don't wander alone, take heed of the shadows, watch out for the crone. She waits and she wants you, she knows that you're there, don't wander alone, tread softly with care. Isn't that cute? Isn't he cute? He's such a cute little gentleman. Yeah. He's not very gentlemanly. We know this. I waited till here to get into this conversation, I guess, because there's a lot of people that don't like Richard Laymon, or they did like Richard Laymon and they don't anymore. And I can completely understand that. And I feel that a lot of his books come from a place where he's writing from his own fears, where he talks about him fearing for the care of his family, being afraid in the woods, being afraid in the dark alone. He has a lot of fears of his own. And back in the day, maybe there wasn't as much of a trauma-informed angle or lens to look at things through. However, there were the things that caused trauma found within the pages of these books. So there was a lens, people weren't talking around it. There was a way that people could experience real lived experiences, however dark and dreadful that happen in these books. So I think that I liked the camping story so much because there's always that fear when you're out there in a tent alone, especially as a woman. A lot of things could happen, dark, dreadful things that are talked about in these books. And it is sort of like a preparedness point of view, if you want to look at it that way, which I do sometimes. It's also just being able to live through those fears. And that is what this is. It's this mental roller coaster you get to go through. So the next time you go camping, maybe you feel a little more ready if something goes really sideways or very dark. What he says about Tread Softly, 1987, in A Writer's Tale is, the writing of this book marked a new stage in my career, largely due to the influences of Dean Koontz. I decided to mainstream my horror. He'd not only advised such a step, thank you, Dean Koontz, for that, but he'd given detailed advice on how to go about it in his book, How to Write Best-Selling Fiction. And I believe that Regina's Haunted Library, talks about that book in a specific video. I'll link it if I can find it. But she has talked about it because she's a lucky owner of that particular book. And I think it really informs her awesome writing too. Taking his suggestions to heart, I was determined to enlarge the scope of my material so that my next book would be more than simply a horror genre novel. Before Tread Softly, my horror novels were short and to the point. They never lingered, they never elaborated. The scenes were shot very rapid fire, with a breathless pace that never paused for description, rarely for explanation. The stories raced along non-stop from start to finish, which is a lot of what fans like me like about some of his earlier stuff, and his stuff in general, especially No Sanctuary, where he sort of returned to that. It's not one of my favorites, but it's a lot of people's favorites. In Dean's opinion, I insisted on the slam-bang pace because I lacked confidence in my ability to hold the reader's interest. I was afraid I might bore them if I didn't plunge from wild, over-the-top scenes to the next. He was right, of course, and on my way to getting a high school diploma, a BA in English, and an MA in English literature, I'd been forced to read huge amounts of fiction. Much of it was great, exciting stuff, but much of it bored me. From a very early age, I was a rebel against boring fiction, and I equated boring with lengthy, descriptive passages and with scenes in which nothing much seemed to happen. I always wanted to be a writer that got on with it. Therefore, I was determined in my fiction to avoid writing that didn't move the story forward at a good, quick clip. And most of it does, even when he's taking his time. Like Island is a good example we'll get to eventually here, that he does take his time. It's a very slow-paced book for a Richard Laymon novel, even though it starts out with a bang. It really does. But yeah, Tread Softly, Dark Mountain, something I need to reread, but a book that I keep holding in high regard. And this is one of those books that I want to see if my opinion changes as I read through more of his catalog. Now, Island. I won't talk about Island a whole lot because I have a whole video about it. I've talked about Island a couple times. I love this book. This is my number one favorite. And I'd have to put Dark Mountain, Tread Softly at 3. And I will put The Woods Are Dark tied for 3 because this is a list of 6 with a bonus book. I absolutely love this book. It is a departure. It is a slower paced book. It is from the point of view of Rupert, and he is a dark little fellow, but he doesn't really start out that way. We meet him because he's on an island, kind of stranded because the yacht he was on with his girlfriend he doesn't really like just blew up, and he's stranded with her family and their family friends, and he's kind of all alone. Yeah, it's extremely dark. I had a lot of fun with Island, and it is a departure because it is depraved, but it is a book that kind of thrives on the unexpected, and maybe Richard Laymon will let us know why. Earlier in A Writer's Tale, he talks about a book about an island where people are stranded on an island, and he's ghostwriting it for these people, but the project kind of fell apart. So I don't know if that was part of the impetus for it, or if he spent time on islands that made him want to write this particular book, but it also seemed like a really good isolated area, so I can see why he wrote it. Now, he had decided to go into this book writing it without a plot structure, without an outline. He was just winging it. So he just started writing this diary of Rupert's as we get it. And I love that approach, and I love knowing that that was the approach because it explains a lot of the unexpected twists. And you know what, when Rupert approaches his diary, he has to tell us about what happened the day before or the hour before, and it's all off the cuff, and I absolutely love that. So that said, when they started working on the cover art, not this cover art that you see, but the original cover art, which I love, when they started talking about cover art with headline, he didn't have a plot to tell them. So he's like, I don't know what you want to put on the cover. So the decision, according to Richard Laymon, eventually came in against a Swiss Army knife stuck into the palm tree. On the cover of my book would be a straight razor. But here's the thing. As mentioned earlier, I was still in the process of writing Island, and I knew that there would be a straight razor appear prominently on the cover now. So I beefed up the role of the razor, and the book was better for it. That razor, the places it went and the things it did, all because of some decisions that were made about what to put on the cover. And I really like knowing that because I love the cover, for one, and the razor does play a big role in it. But it's interesting to see how he was flexible in his writing routines. In writing Island, I let the story develop in its own way, and I mostly just followed along to see what would happen next. But I helped it along too. I was the master of games here, and my game was to keep things moving at a quick pace and see how far I could go. I pretty much pushed the situation to the format to its limits, and on the final page of my manuscript, page 594, I tossed a hand grenade, figuratively, into the works. As for the ending, I didn't know that I'd do it till I did it. I knew I might, but I also felt as if I left that final decision up to Rupert. Wow. It is an island adventure starring Rupert, and we get a lot of this from Rupert's point of view. When Rupert Conway set out on a cruise with 7 other people, he planned to swim a little, get some sun, and relax. He certainly didn't plan on getting shipwrecked. But after the yacht blew up, that's what happened. I love just how off the cuff it really is. And he and his shipmates were stranded on a deserted island. I love how vague the back jacket is here, and I think that maybe he had learned some lessons from the foibles with Out Are the Lights, where everything was given away, and he felt again that Warner had messed him up and ruined his career in the US yet again. The description on the back does go on a little bit, but it does remain deliciously vague. Speaking of In the Dark, I have talked about this book as well. I did a buddy read with some of the gorgeous ladies of BookTube, with Regina St. Clair and Merce from Harpies in the Trees and Marie McWilliams and Alex the Bookubus. We all sat down for a buddy read one rainy day and read through In the Dark, which is like one of the craziest ones. Like, the Beast House is crazy. The Cellar is crazy. A lot of other Richard Laymon stuff is crazy. But this has an extra level of insanity thanks to the master of games himself. I think when I read this, and this will be like number 4 on my list of all-time favorites, it's up there, but it's maybe not as good as Tread Softly, as far as I remember. It's not as good as The Woods Are Dark. It's not as good as Island, of course. It's not as good as the next book I'm going to talk about, but In the Dark is super fun, and it was, to me, it was like, everybody's so creative. Look at what he did here. And I was also playing a live action role-playing game of Vampire the Masquerade at the time, and had dabbled in some D&D Rifts sort of stuff. The cyberpunk tabletop game with cards as well. So I was on the fringes of tabletop and role-playing games, pen and paper role-playing games too. So this sort of thing spoke to me. I also spent a lot of times in libraries, so the story told from a librarian's perspective is kind of rare still, and I really, really enjoyed that about this book. On its surface level, if you take out some of the really raucous and insane gore and the really terrifying portions that happen near the end of this book that make it an extreme horror novel, it's just extremely creative. Nothing much happens in Donnersville, at least not to the young librarian Jane Carey. Then one day Jane finds an envelope containing a $50 bill and a note instructing her to look homeward, Angel. Jane pulls a copy of the Thomas Wolfe novel of that title off the shelf and finds a second envelope. It's like every library nerd's dream, really. This one contains a $100 bill and another clue. Like the first, it's signed M.O.G., Master of Games. The game has begun. This was written sort of mid-career for Richard Laymon in 1994. Now, he has to say, from A Writer's Tale, Though the basic idea of the plot seemed fairly simple, I saw that it had real potential. It was exactly what I wanted, an adventure story, a treasure hunt, a deep mystery. Now, I will put an asterisk at treasure hunt. It is such a 10-year-old boy kind of imagination thing to do, and you can see threads of that through a lot of his writing. He just gets excited while he's coming up with these ideas, and I'll bet he spent 10 hours a day just writing with maniacal glee. A deep mystery, plenty of room for suspense, scares, and horror. Also, it's infinitely expendable. There was no built-in limit to the number of adventures that Jane might experience, so I had no trouble writing my minimum of 600 pages. Not only could I expand the story to my heart's content, but it had an open format. Master of Games could send Jane just about anywhere, and the possibilities were staggering. And he does send her anywhere, and this is sort of a hint toward another one of my favorite books that we'll talk about in a second, Night in the Lonesome October, where the possibilities are endless, because it's really, what do you want to do today, Napoleon? That's the sort of sense of adventure that you get from this book and the other. I'm going to break from the chronological order here and talk about Night in the Lonesome October, which, I guess it's number 5 on my list, number 6 on my list, because it's really hard for me to definitively put this in because I love this book so very much. I've talked about it before because I've reviewed it on the show as part of my Richard Laymon rereading adventure. So I think that it is pretty much cemented in the top 5 somewhere, maybe the 6th book. Now, this was published posthumously, so there isn't anything about him talking about it. In A Writer's Tale, he does kind of chronologically talk about when he started writing things, when he had ideas for things, what inspired things, and sometimes leaves it vague, like this inspired a future book. There's a lot of little things in his life. Of course, the college that he writes about, the colleges he went to, universities he went to, small towns that he visited, just weird happenings at night. Who knows if there's things in the news that inspired this particular book? Or maybe just wondering what his daughter gets up to at night. Those sorts of things that run through a man's mind. And I really think that this is the culmination of a lot of those fears that aren't in the forests that ended up in this novel. And I wish that we had more input about what his writing process was for it. In A Writer's Tale, he does talk about going to school a lot. Upon being graduated from Redwood, I headed north for Willamette University in Salem, Oregon, to begin my days as a college student. Willamette is the inspiration for the fictional university, Belmore, which appears in some of my novels. I majored in English, wrote a lot, and had stories and poetry published in the university literary magazine. He went to USC, UCLA, Loyola, and, of course, most famously, Willamette. And I think that this really inspired the school and the students. He had a really innate understanding of how students relate to one another. So he spent a lot of time on campus, and as a young guy and an adult, both, right? So he really had a good grasp on how these people talk to one another. And I find that the way that people relate to one another in this is quite believable. It also has that sort of surreality of the Lovecraftian sense of what it's like on a college campus, which isn't very realistic, especially not anymore. And I like that you have that sort of undertone of the unexpected and surreality underneath these college students and their campus. The story revolves around a man that goes for walks at night because he can't sleep. He's sort of toying with being between relationships. He has a lot on his mind and he just can't sleep. So he goes for walks at night, and it's the things that he encounters and the people he meets on these nightly prowls that are very strange. And it makes for a very effective horror story, the way that this unfolds with its anything can happen day, right? Sort of mentality. He was a morning walker. He did to go for walks. Not at night, though. He doesn't talk about going for walks at night, and maybe he did. I don't know. I didn't know the man, but he does talk about taking walks to clear his head in the morning and for health. Stupid walks for my mental health kind of thing. I'm sure that was a thing all of our lives. It only got popular over the pandemic. But I will say, I love taking a walk, especially when you have something writerly on your mind. You're trying to work through a plot point, do the dishes, go for a walk. He went for morning walks, but he does talk about walking alone at night and being scared. He did spend a lot of time going to movies, horror movies, alone, probably because he was the one with the free time and the desire to go watch them while his family needed to stay home and raise a daughter. So he ended up being alone at night a lot, watching horror movies. The place had real atmosphere, the Culver City Theater, and it had colorful patrons. Some were certainly devoted film and horror fans like myself. Others seemed a little shady. I sat by myself, never spoke to anyone, and usually felt creepy about the whole experience, which added to the flavor of the films, no doubt. After watching movies like Halloween or Prom Night or any of the hundreds of others, I always had to leave the theater alone and walk through the empty streets to reach my car. If the movie'd been good enough, the walk back to my car would be harrowing. I not only had to worry about real thugs, but about the likes of Mrs. Voorhees and Michael Myers coming after me. I know they really don't exist, he says. I knew they couldn't get me, but the power of certain movies set me on edge. I'd hurry down the empty sidewalks and an especially creepy passageway alongside the theater, glancing over my shoulder, goosebumps often skittering up my spine. At the car, I'd also be careful to check the back seat before climbing in. I mean, I've not heard many men talk about checking the back seat of a car. I'm sure many do, but I just never really heard it till now. That's a delicious and cute anecdote. Then I'd lock the doors, and on the short drive home, I always worried I might arrive home and find that someone had butchered Anne and Kelly in my absence. A grown man. Hey, I was in my early 30s at the time, but frequently spooked. And that's the good imagination. You have to write about what scares you, right? And I think that that's why he had such a prolific career writing about these things that are very unsettling, untoward, and scary, because he was a man that was spooked quite easily. Number 2 on my list is Cuts still. It's just so bonkers. I could safely say all of these are in my top 6 plus. All of these could fit into the top 3, really, and just jockey for position continuously, depending on my mood. But Cuts is consistently one that I think about all the time. It is not as good to me as Island, but it is my second most favorite Richard Laymon novel ever. And I have this beautiful copy. I'd really hoped, because this was printed in 1999, about the same time that A Writer's Tale came out, he was being interviewed extensively. His career was really big. He was the president of the Horror Writers Association at this time, I believe. It was only 2 years still before he passed away, so there's time for him to be interviewed about this, right? Wrong. I can't find any interviews where he talks specifically about Cuts. Like, I can't find anything where he alludes to Night in the Lonesome October. So if you know of any interviews with Richard Laymon or places where he talks about his writing process and Albert Prince at all, I'd be very interested to hear his take on this. I mean, this is one that is exceptionally brutal, and it does end with a real twist, and I really do appreciate that. Like a lot of people who are fans of this particular book, finding it like extraordinarily creative. And I've used the word creative a couple times to stand in for a whole host of treacherous evil deeds, right? Creative. In a suburb of Chicago, Albert Prince parks on a dark street thinking he's about to get lucky with Betty, only to find out that she wants cash and not romance. And Albert, he's a few bucks short. Dig up the rest of the money tomorrow, says Betty, and give me a call. We'll have a great time tomorrow night, but Albert won't be seeing Betty tomorrow night. He'll be having a great time without her in a stranger's house with a beautiful woman and a knife. Wow. I read that description a couple times because I've talked about Cuts on the show. I have reviewed it as well, so it's at typicalbooks.com as a review. I'll leave a link to that review below and the video where I talk about it more extensively. There's nothing really specifically from Richard Laymon that talks about this book, but the themes that happen in it. I mean, there's some very out of the box themes for Richard Laymon. So I would have liked to see where his career would have gone from here. This is one of the last books that he put out, and I found it very different from most of his writing. Still brutal, still super horny, but he was experimenting, much like he did with Island, and it was such a hit, and his career continued to change as he tried these experiments, as he learned lessons as a writer. He imparts so many of them in A Writer's Tale, but I only wish that he would have had several more years to impart more. Some of the most brutal things happen in that book, And it's sort of a great culmination of a lot of the things that he's known for, like super horny, really lascivious nudity and sex, and the super wild male gaze that is apparent in a lot of his books. It's very apparent in this book with a twist, though, so it makes it like a whole different sort of story, a very different lens that this book is taken through. And I really enjoy the end of it because you can really see him as a father coming through and his understanding of a female point of view working really well in this particular novel. And it would take, I think if somebody already doesn't like Richard Laymon, that book is not going to help change their mind. But I think that if someone is yearning for Richard Laymon that's a little more smart but still as brutal, that Cuts is really that sort of book to choose if you're looking for that. There was an interview called Biting Remarks, A Candid Conversation with Richard Laymon by Gregory Nickel in 1999 as well, where he talks just a little bit about brutality. And I think that this really informed a lot of what was going on in Cuts and maybe Night in the Lonesome October to a lesser degree because it's not as brutal, but Cuts extremely brutal. For example, he says, look at all the books and movies which a gal gets snatched by a serial killer. In how many of them is she immediately stripped down to her bare skin? Very, very few. But that's what would happen in almost every case in real life, and everybody knows it. That's what bad guys do when they grab gals. It's not nice, but it's true. My purpose is to write truly. In doing so, I try to have people behave the way that real people behave, and not the way that people behave in most bestsellers and mainstream movies. My male characters, even the good guys, are usually fairly horny and voyeuristic. Sometimes so are my gals. If a man or woman gets in a fight, he or she might have some clothing torn. If people are injured, they remove clothing in order to bandage wounds. We don't necessarily leave the other room or look the other way when they change clothes, bathe, have sex, or use the toilet. And there's a lot of that in Cuts. Cuts is not only a lot of serial killer point of view, it's serial killer being bored and making a sandwich in the house point of view, which I think is very interesting. It's serial killer having a shower and remarking about how much blood and dirt is all over him. Ew. And putting on some clothes. Hell, why not the girls' clothes? That's comfortable and I'm feeling fancy. It's very interesting. There's a lot of toiletry and there's in a lot of his books, people getting changed and what clothes decisions they're making. This does not lack that either. And there is some voyeuristic things, but there's also, like he's pointed out in that passage, some voyeurism from the other side of the glass. And I really like that about this particular book. So I wish he would have had more to say about Cuts. Like I've said, if you know of any books where Richard Laymon, the man, the legend, talks about Cuts or in the Lonesome October, any of the specific notes that he would have made while writing it, I'd really love to hear about it. So as far as a top 6, number 1, Island. Number 2, Cuts. Number 3, The Woods Are Dark. And it's a very close 3, this podium of bronze, gold, and silver. For the next 3 of my favorite 6, Night in the Lonesome October comes in number 4, and it's a very close to number 3 because I love this book so very much. This is where things will eventually maybe change. I still have to read Out Are the Lights, which isn't here because I don't own a copy. But Dark Mountain, Tread Softly, from my memory alone, I'd have to say it's here at number 5 and number 6 in the dark. This might change too because that could be my number 5. I have to reread Tread Softly in the form of Dark Mountain, and I also have to reread Out Are the Lights because I absolutely loved that book. So we'll see. This is my top 6 Richard Laymon. There's so much Richard Laymon to choose from. I'm not sure if all of these books are in your top 5, top 6, top 10. Let me know if you have at least a number 1 favorite Richard Laymon novel. I know we've talked lots about Richard Laymon before, but hey, I thought I would put this video out first before I talk about my top 5 Clive Barker that I've read, my top 5 Stephen King, and go for some of these softer, more approachable horror authors, maybe even my top 5 Jack Ketchum or Edward Lee. I thought I'd start with my favorite Richard Laymon. I hope he's one of your favorites too. I know a lot of people vacillate between having been a Richard Laymon fan and not being one anymore, or rediscovering him, and then finding a lot of his books are very samey and falling out of love with that. So yeah, I hope that you're a fan if you've made it this far through this video. Thank you so much for watching, and have an ooky, spooky day.